A History of English Literature from Earliest Times to 1916 by Arthur Compton Rickett. This book was one of my textbooks for my English Honours course in Loreto College, Darjeeling, and to my best knowledge is not available anywhere else. We now continue with the section on medieval scholarship and the Latin writers. This section is the Southern School. Florence of Worcester was a brother of the monastery of Worcester and is notable for having produced the first attempt at universal history in his Chronicon es Chronicis. Beginning with the creation of the world, he continues his account to 1082 with the help of the Universal Chronicle of Marianus Scotus, and for the latter part he uses the English Annals of Worcester. Florence is little more than a compiler, although occasionally the references to his own times are useful. Eadmer, a Benedictine monk of Canterbury, a follower and intimate friend of Anselm, wrote in 6 books a history of his own times down to 1122, entitled Historia Novarum in Anglia. Whilst concerning himself mainly with ecclesiastical matters, and aiming chiefly at giving an account of the investiture dispute of Anselm with William II and Henry, he includes matters which led up to the quarrel as well as those that followed, and incidentally throws much light on social and political matters. His work is distinguished by its design and sense of proportion. Eadmer, spelled Eadmer, also wrote a life of Anselm, which is the best authority on the subject. Ordericus Vitalis was the son of a married priest who came over to England from Orleans with Roger de Montgomery and settled at Atcham near Shrewsbury. When Ordericus was 10 years of age, his mother died and his father retired into a Benedictine monastery which had been founded by Roger. A year later, Ordericus was sent to a monastery at Ush, spelled O-U-C-H-E, afterwards known as the Abbey St. Evroult. There, in his 12th year, he received the tonsure and his name was changed to Vitalis. He spent the rest of his life at the Abbey St. Evroult, which possessed a magnificent library. His Historia Ecclesiastica, a work that occupied many years of his life, is more ambitious in scope than that of Eadmer. The history fills 13 books. The first 2 books are compilations from church history and deal with the period extending from the birth of Christ down to 855. They also contain a list of the popes till 1142. The next 4 books concern the foundation of the monasteries in Normandy, and in particular the history of St. Evroult. The latter part consists of the history of the Norman Wars and of the church down to the conquest. Eadmer is essentially a chronicler and not an historian, but his work is a rich mine of material. He abounds in valuable suggestions. He inserted many genuine copies of letters and epitaphs, and he is on the whole an important authority. William of Malmesbury, circa 1095 to circa 1142, compared with Eadmer and Ordericus, William is a greater historian than either. Milton said of him, "Both for style and judgment, William is by far the best writer of all." William's great inspirer was Bede, and he desires to follow him and tell the history of England artistically and critically, and especially to fill in the period occurring between the ancient and modern history. William's work is in two parts: a history of the kings of England 449 to 1127 and the Historia Novella or modern history 1142. The second part was written to please his patron Robert of Gloucester and gives a description of the struggle between Stephen and the Empress Matilda. William's other works were a history of Glastonbury and a life of St. Wulfstan. A man of sound judgment, William had also the artist's instinct for salient and significant features. A lover of books and a considerable traveller, his eager, inquiring spirit carried him beyond the prejudices and narrow standards of the cloister. His fondness for anecdotes leads him to include in his writings many errors and fables. But he is able to invest his details with imaginative interest, and his writings have therefore a value especially to the student of early English history. As a historian, Henry of Huntingdon does not occupy such an important place as William of Malmesbury. Henry was a secular cleric and lived under the patronage of Robert Bloit, Bishop of Lincoln, and afterwards under his successor Alexander of Blois. By command of Alexander, he wrote his History of the English, which he extended to the year 1154. In the earlier portion, he draws from Bede and the English annals, but he also borrows from oral tradition and popular poetry. He gives from the annals a metrical version of the Battle of Brunanburg. Henry has been styled a facile writer but a perfunctory historian. Quotes, "He was ambitious but not laborious, literary but not exact, intelligent but not penetrating. He formed large projects but was too indolent to exercise them satisfactorily." Close quote. De Contemptu Mundi, his last work, addressed to the friend to whom he had dedicated his youthful verses, "A youth to a youth I dedicated juvenilities. An old man to an old man I destine now the thoughts of age." The life of Thomas A. Becket, written by William Fitzstephen, himself a Londoner and a witness of Becket's death, contains some interesting references to the social life of the times. He testifies also to the popularity of the miracles. Benedict of Peterborough, Benedict's name has been associated with the most authoritative chronicle of the reign of Henry II, begun 1172. But all that can be stated with any certainty is that the MS was transcribed by his order. Benedict wrote the Passion and Miracles of Becket. Ralph of Decatur occupied an important position, being Archdeacon of Middlesex, and from 1180 to 1202 he was Dean of St. Paul's. Ralph was consequently brought in contact with many of the public men of the day. His Imagines Historiarium is therefore of interest from this point of view. Ralph was a shrewd judge of character and endeavors to analyze the motives and underlying causes of events. Gervase of Canterbury may be mentioned as a writer who perpetuates the Brutus legend in his Gesta Regum. The Chronicle of Jocelyn of Brakelond, monk of St. Elmonsbury, affords a picture of monastic and social life of the 12th century. Giraldus Cambrenius Gerald de Barry, 1146 to 1220, was born in Wales of Norman parents and was distinguished throughout his life for his passionate love for his country. A scholar trained in Paris and an eminent churchman, he was twice elected by the chapter to the bishopric of St. David's, but was kept out by the opposition of the king. A quick observer of men, with a ready facility for all kinds of curious knowledge, of which he has left a record in his Topographia Hibernico, an account of a tour in Ireland, which he undertook with Prince John, and in Itinerarium Cumbriae. He also wrote an autobiography. Walter Mapes was born on the borders of Wales in 1143. Mapes studied at the University of Paris. An amusing sketch of the university at this time is given in Varcar's Brunellus, or Speculum Stultorum, Mirror of Fools, a satirical poem consisting of 3,800 lines of Latin elegiac verse. Mapp came to England in attendance on King Henry II. He held many offices at various times. Being a judge chaplain to the king, he also represented Henry at the court of Louis VII. He became a canon of St. Paul's, precentor of Lincoln, and finally archdeacon of Oxford. His De Nugi Curialium of Courtiers' Trifles, the title of which he borrowed from his learned contemporary John of Salisbury, Bishop of Chartres, 1176, who produced a work entitled Polycraticus, or On the Trifles of Courtiers and Tracts of the Philosophers, 1156-9. Mapp gave the title to his commonplace book, a medley of curious information and witty anecdotes. He gives an account of the various heretical sects of the 12th century, together with reflections on the Norman kings and current opinions. His work might well be styled Table Talk at the court of Henry II. Matthew Paris, circa 1195 to 1259, the greatest of all the medieval historians, was a Benedictine monk of St. Albans Abbey, 1217. There arose at this abbey an influential school of historical writers. St. Albans Abbey was the chief center of monastic culture in the 10th century. It possessed many advantages. It stood on the main road, Watling Street, and was therefore in constant intercourse with important men of the day, since the monasteries entertained travelers of every degree. Moreover, the writing of history had been carefully organized under Abbot Simpson, died 1183, who established a regular office of historiographer. Roger of Wendover was the first occupant of the office, and Matthew Paris succeeded to the post on the death of Roger in 1236. He revised and continued the Flores Historiam of Roger in his Historia Major, a work that gives a comprehensive and wonderfully skillful survey of English and continental history down to 1259. In 1248, Matthew accepted the invitation of Hakon, King of Norway, to undertake a mission of reform to the monks of Holm. He was absent 18 months. On his return, he enjoyed the favor and intimacy of Henry III, who gave him information concerning matters of state which form a valuable element in his history. He also gave him a seat near the throne during the feast of Edward the Confessor in 1247, in order that the event might be accurately recorded. Matthew was a man of wide sympathies, scholar, courtier, monk and man of the world, and in addition, a born historian. He took much trouble to verify his facts and obtained information from many sources. He had numerous correspondents both at home and abroad. It has been said his work reads like a stately journal of European events. He is at times an outspoken critic, not afraid to rebuke the king or denounce the rapacity of the nobles. Matthew stands at the head of the historians of Henry's day, and after his death, the art of the historian entered on a period of decline. The literary distinctions which marked the writers of the 12th and 13th centuries was not continued in their successors. Henry of Bracton, died 1268, wrote a treatise on the laws of England. In addition to his legal work, he left a notebook containing 2,000 cases taken from the plea rolls of his time with comments, which probably came from Bracton's hand and head. Bracton was not first in the field, for Ralph Glanville, who is said to have lent Richard I £15,000 for the Crusades, and to have been killed at the siege of Acre in 1190, wrote a treatise on the laws and customs of England. The difference between them is that whereas Glanville regarded his subject from the practical point of view, Bracton treated it from the standpoint of the theorist.